Go
I
ahead.
would be glad to. Lord, thank you so much for this opportunity to be together another time. It's our swan song, but we're looking forward to finishing up John all together. We thank you so much for Brooks and Mary Elizabeth that have brought us these wonderful lessons, and we look forward to more lessons of some kind in the future. Please be with all of us and help us to learn what you have to share with us. And we truly, truly are thankful. And for all that are here and listening that or that couldn't be with us, please keep them safe as they travel or have health issues and bring them to good health and safety. We ask these things in your Son and our Savior's name, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. All right, so if you guys remember at the end of last week, I mentioned that that was a great end of the book of John. And that's maybe where we thought it originally ended. And while that is true scholarly, we also know that we have no documents of the Gospel of John from our earliest manuscripts that do not include chapter 21. They all include this chapter. So even though scholars, and when you look at it, it feels like chapter 20 is the ending, chapter 21 has always been there. And so as we get into chapter 21, we're going to see kind of a combination of, or an addition of stories we've heard similar aspects of in other parts of the Gospel of John and in the Synoptic Gospels as well. Sorry. Do you remember the two places, or well, there's three, but the two main places that the disciples are said to have met Jesus after the resurrection in the Synoptics and in John?
Was it by the sea?
Yeah, one is Galilee or by the sea. That's Mark and Matthew.
Okay, that was when I think Jesus fixed breakfast for everybody.
Well, yeah, well, that's what we're going to have today, yes. But he tells, at the end of Mark, he tells Mary to tell the disciples to go to Galilee and he will go ahead of them and meet them there. And then in Matthew, that's also where the disciples see Jesus again. And in Luke, it's in Jerusalem, which is also what we had last week in John. But today we are at the Sea of Tiberias, which is the Galilee again concept. So John has both. And so we'll jump in today to this aspect, to these stories. So would anyone like to read? It's gonna go through 14. We can split it up if you'd like, but 21 through 14.
I'll be glad to start.
Perfect. And you can stop whenever you want, and I'll jump on or someone else can.
All right. It's kind of in three little sections. How about if I take the first section?
Sounds great.
All right. After these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he showed himself in this way. Gathered there together were Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana of Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two other of his disciples. Simon Peter said to them, I am going fishing. They said to him, We will go with you. They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing.
Just after daybreak, Jesus stood on the beach, but the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, Children, you have no fish, have you? They answered him, No. He said to them, Cast the net to the right side of the boat and you will find some. So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because there were so many fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, It is the Lord. When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on some clothes, for he was naked, and jumped into the sea. But the other disciples came up in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, only about 100 yards off.
When they had gone ashore, they saw a charcoal fire there, with fish on it, and bread. Jesus said to them, Bring some of the fish that you have just caught. So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. And though there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now none of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" because they knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread, and he gave it to them and did the same with the fish. This was now the third time that Jesus appeared to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. All right, so we have this story starting out where they are back at the Sea of Tiberias and they're going fishing, doing what they know, kind of back into the habits. Still led by Simon Peter. And they go out and they catch nothing. Now, this story might sound familiar to you. Luke has a similar story in his calling of the first disciples. It's in Luke 5. And in Luke 5, Jesus is speaking to a crowd, and these two boats are there, and he's next to the lake of Gennesaret. And he asked them, "Let me go, please let me stand on your boat and take me out a little ways so the water will amplify my voice and I can speak to all these people." And so they're like, "Fine, all right, we'll do that." It's Simon Peter's boat and a few of the others. And so he does this, and then afterwards he says, "Drop your nets on this side of the boat." And they're like, "We've just fished all night and haven't caught anything," which two stories of Simon Peter going out fishing all night and not catching anything is kind of funny. But they go, "All right, if you say it, we'll do it." And they do it and they catch fish. And Simon Peter is so amazed that he's able to catch fish that he realizes Jesus is a very powerful person. He says, "Lord, have mercy on me, for I'm a sinner," which just tells you how bad of a fisherman he must have been to have that reaction to just catching fish. I can only imagine how he paid the bills. But so we have a similar story here. And it's also just a similar story to a calling of the disciples story where they do as this person tells them, they realize it's Jesus, and they follow or they go to him. But we have a certain named disciple. So we have Simon Peter, good old Thomas. You're always going to have Thomas when something's going down, it seems like. Nathanael of Cana of Galilee. Does anyone remember how he was described back in John 1? This is months and months ago, but that's okay.
I have no memory.
All right.
I'm looking.
Look, I want to say it's around 45-ish.
Oh, Philip, Philip found Nathanael. We have seen him, about whom Moses, the prophets, wrote. Nathanael, can anything good come out of Nazareth? That's the guy.
Out of Jesus's home, perfect, good start. Which, I mean, he's from Canaan and Galilee, so this is basically like rival towns. You know, they're doing the whole nothing good comes out of Alabama.
My Bible said he was a true Israelite.
There it is.
A man of complete
Whatever that means.
integrity.
Jesus called him a true Israelite, which there's so much to that, but we have the true Israelite still here hanging out with Simon Peter.
So did he wind up at the wedding feast?
He is at the wedding feast. Later, he starts following Jesus there in chapter 1. And then we have the sons of Zebedee. And who are they? Do we remember?
James and John.
John, sons of thunder. And then two other disciples. They ran out of money to have named disciples, so they just cast extras.
Well, we assume one was John, right?
Well, is John is the beloved disciple John, son of Zebedee, or are the two extra disciples was there kind of a confusion because there's two sons of Zebedee and they're trying to say two sons and they get to 7 instead of 5 because you have 5 in the first chapter, or 7 because it's a complete number? to kind of show the fullness of him. We don't know. We just don't know who those disciples are. Is one of those disciples the beloved disciple, or as many people think, is it John, the son of Zebedee? But either way, we have 7 disciples here, and Simon Peter said to them, "I'm going fishing," which was obviously his, and and James and John's profession. We don't know about Thomas or Nathan or the other 2 disciples. But we know some of these were professional fishermen, and they caught nothing. And this kind of, again, if we're looking for symbolism, we have this kind of, they're not hopeless because they've seen Jesus, because it says the 3rd time, but they seem aimless. They don't know what to do without Jesus leading the way right there. And so they've gone back to just doing what they normally do. And they caught nothing. And just after daybreak, Jesus stood on the beach, but the disciples did not know it was Jesus. That just seems to be the method after the resurrection. Anytime you see Jesus, you're never sure until there's food. I don't know what that tells us about Jesus, but if there's food around, you're like, oh, that's Jesus. A man knows how to eat. But once there's food, then they know it's Jesus. He says, "Children, you have no fish, have you?" Or you haven't caught anything, depending on how you translate have. And they answered him, "No." And he said, "Cast the net." And then, so they cast the net, and they were not able to haul it in because there were so many fish. And that the disciple who Jesus loved said, "Oh, it's the Lord." Which again, who was the first person to believe and recognize that Jesus is John, the beloved disciple, just a chapter earlier, first to recognize each time. But Peter's always the first to go do something dumb. Fine, I'm going. All right. Second I hear anything that could be Jesus, I'm coming. And so he again jumps out of the boat. Some of the language here is weird. And so it says, Simon Peter heard it was the Lord, and he put on his outer garment, for he had taken it off and jumped into the sea. Does anyone say any other translation there?
So when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his tunic, for he had stripped for work, jumped into the water, and headed to shore.
Yeah. So it has also been translated, he was naked. We have all this. Clearly, he doesn't have a garment on in some way, or he has something on because it wouldn't fit with Jewish culture for him to be completely in the nude. And so he has something on, but it seems like some kind of outer garment is not on. But then he puts on more clothes to go swimming, is also a weird thing.
Yes.
Because I don't know if you've ever gone swimming. It's not what you do. So
This passage has always struck me as peculiar.
yes,
I took all the lifeguard training, and the first thing you do if you're in the water is get these clothes and shoes off so you can swim and float a little better. But so there must be some sort of other observation he's trying. Oh, if it's Jesus, I better look better. I better put my coat and tie and my hat because it's Jesus. The boss is here. I have to dress up. I
yeah,
don't know. I can't think why else he would put anything on and jump in.
yeah.
You say he must have at least a loincloth on. He's got some covering.
Yes, covering. And so there's a Father Brown translates it as he kind of straps his clothes onto himself. So like that he takes the clothes that he maybe had sitting down and ties them around himself so that he has them with him.
When he gets to the beach.
If we're trying to think of it logically like that, if we're trying to think of it symbolically, it's kind of, we can think of it in a couple different ways. The way Paul uses clothe yourself with righteousness, or when Jesus talks about the wedding bank, those who aren't dressed for the wedding will be cast out of the wedding. So clothing has been used in Scripture to indicate kind of spiritual living, like living righteously. And so that could be symbolically, we could understand it as they were in this kind of aimless place. He's doesn't really have any, he's still recovering, I guess, from denying Jesus, and he puts on and starts to head that way towards Jesus.
Clothing would also float.
Clothing could also float, but it is just darn hard to swim with clothing on, especially 100 yards, because that's just a long way if you're not
Mm.
swimming all the time, and I can't imagine clothed. But yeah, let's see. Yeah, so the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the nets full of fish, for they were not far from land, only about 100. And then we get to when they got to shore, they saw a charcoal fire there with fish on it and bread. If we were thinking of the Eucharist, what would we expect what the two elements to be?
Bread
Bread
and
and
wine.
wine.
Bread and wine. But here we have fish, and so part of that is one, Jesus already has a fish outside of them having caught fish. So there's probably some symbolism there. And two, what other story do we have about bread and fish?
Feeding of the 5,000.
Feeding of the 5,000. So we have a call, and the feeding of the 5,000 also has a lot of Eucharistic or communion imagery in it. So no matter what, we're getting this connection of communion, the Eucharist, call back to one of Jesus's 7 signs. And then Jesus says to him, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." And so Simon Peter went back aboard and hauled the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them, though there were so many, but the nets weren't torn. We don't know what 153 means, but if you want to write a dissertation, this is one of those things where it's like you got a good story and you can kind of back it up. We'd love to hear it. So 153 could mean a few different things. It could point to Ezekiel 47:10. There's a word there, or a couple words there in the, I think in the Septuagint. So in the Greek, even though it was originally written in Hebrew. Let me go there. It's one of the few verses I did not put on my pamphlet. So we're talking. This is talking about water flowing down from the temple in the New Jerusalem. If I'm not sure if you guys are there yet in Mary Elizabeth's Sunday morning class, but at the end of Ezekiel, we have the New Jerusalem, where John gets a lot of his imagery and revelation to view the New Jerusalem. And so this is the New Jerusalem, talking about the river, the water flowing down, that water of life flowing down. And in verse 10, it talks about people will stand fishing beside the sea from En-gedi to Eneglaim, and it will be a place for the spreading of nets, and its fish will be of a great many kinds, like the fish of the great sea. And so this is one of those ones where they start getting weird with numbers and how the letters and numbers can mean different things. And so En-gedi is 17, and Eneglaim is 153. And 153 is the number you get if you add every number starting with 1 and going to 17. And so if John was really bored and was like, "Hey, I want to put a really deep people," he might have come up with that. In any other way, he is pointing to the fact that there are all these different types of fish, because this is supposed to be a symbol, more importantly, for going on mission. If we think back to the Luke story, after Simon Peter pulls up all these fish and he goes like, "Get away from me, holy man, I'm scared." He says, if you think this is impressive, I'll make you fishers of men. And so the great harvest or the great catch of fish is to point to the great mission of being an apostle and the great harvest that will come from that. And so we get back to that, and we're supposed to view this as this vast variety of fish, all these different kinds that are going to come, all these different types of people who will come and be part of the church. The Sea of Tiberias is also a Gentile name, so we could be thinking of the fact that this is possibly pointing to the inclusion of Gentiles into the church. And then when we see Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore, the net not being torn is, let me see how I wrote it. The unbroken state of the net means that the Christian community is not broken by schisms, despite the great number and different kinds of men brought into the church. And so there's a great symbolism here. Also in an early 80 AD Jewish rabbinical text called the Testament of Zebulun in chapter 6, verse 6, it implies that an abundant catch of fish was known as a sign of God's favor, which just makes sense if you think about, oh man, your luck was with you today, or God was smiling on you when something goes good for you. But this was a common way of saying that God's favor is with you. Yeah. And so the fish here, just as in Luke, are a symbol of the apostolic mission to catch men. And I'm trying to think what else here. Oh, yes. If we go to the word haul, if anybody could jump to John 12:32. And that section is Jesus talking about his death and resurrection.
I've got it.
John 12:32. Can you read that for me?
It says, and I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself.
And so this word for haul and this word for draw are the same. And so we can also see John tying this all together, that after the resurrection, drawing people to himself, Peter is stepping in and the disciples are stepping into this mission of drawing people to Christ as they bring these fish to Jesus. So this is what they would say is an ecclesial chapter. It's about the establishment of the early church. And so we kind of have a glimpse of that. It's very short in chapter 20, and this is kind of a drawn out story version to help us see that. Yeah, they eat with him, they recognize him. I love how it says the disciples didn't dare ask who he was because they knew it was the Lord. But at the same time, like, that would indicate that they have a question at some level that they would ask.
Right. Like, are they still a little unclear about like what happened? Like, can they really still believe that he was resurrected, or they still doubt what they saw?
Yeah. But when we get to, it's like, what's interesting about that is that when we have Jesus and him not being recognized at first, he keeps being revealed, which is a theme throughout John. If you go back and remember in John 1, when, oh goodness, Brooks, John the Baptist is speaking about the one who's come after him. He's saying there was someone to come after me who will reveal God to Israel. And I want to say it's 1:31. I myself did not know him, but I came baptizing with water for this reason, that he might be revealed to Israel. So this concept of Jesus being revealed, we're kind of jumping back into that. And then we also see this in John 2, after the first miracle in Cana of Galilee, which again, we have Nathan of Galilee here. It says, and verse 11, Jesus did this, the first of his signs in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. And then again, and after his miracle of the blind man, it says he was born blind, so that God's works might be revealed in him. So, and then even in John 17, during the last discourse, Jesus says, I have made your name, talking about God's name, known or revealed to those whom you have given me from the world. We also see this in 1 John, but this concept of revealed, while it feels weird, is to connect Jesus again with that glory of God and with that Spirit of God being revealed to people. And so if we think about the two things in chapter 1 that we talked about earlier today, that Nathanael is a true Israelite, an example of Israel, and that John says that he baptizes so that Jesus will be revealed to Israel, and then you have him revealed to Israel. We kind of have this capstone movement throughout John. And so John's, even though this, in a critical sense, feels in some levels as an addition, Father Brown, who we've been using this whole time, calls it an epilogue. So he talks about, could it be considered an appendix? Could it be considered a supplemental text? Or would it be considered an epilogue? And I had to look up the definition of epilogue to make sure I understood the differences. But epilogue, he says, is a section of speech at the end of a book or play that serves as a comment or a conclusion to what has happened. So, and another theologian says that he argues that a gospel closing should not only include an appearance of the risen Lord, but also a mission of the disciples to the world for its salvation. And so we definitely have that here. But at the same time, we don't really have any much conversation in this great appearance of Jesus. We have to get that in the next section. And so, anybody have any questions before we read this next little bit? If I didn't touch on anything, you have any? Yeah. All right, let's keep going. Who would like to read 15? And we can go all the way to 23.
I can read.
Perfect.
When they had, and my title in my Bible, it says Jesus reinstates Peter. That's the lead. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said, you know that I love you. Then Jesus said, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me? He answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The third time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my sheep. I tell you the truth. When you were younger, you dressed yourself and went wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, follow me. How far do you want me to keep reading?
We get to, sorry. Keep going until 23.
Peter turned and saw that the disciples whom Jesus loved was following them. This was the one who had leaned back against Jesus at the supper and had said, Lord, who is going to betray you? When Jesus saw him, he asked, Lord, what about him? Jesus answered, if I wanted him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You must follow me. Because of this, the rumor spread among the brothers that this disciple would not die. But Jesus did not say that he would not die. He only said, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you?
All right, wonderful. We will get to that. We'll start with that first part again, 15 through 19. And so, just off the bat, what are the first things that come to mind when you hear this story? What are the other stories that are kind of playing in there?
Well, of course, Peter denying Jesus after he was taken away
Yep, denying
3
Jesus.
times.
Yeah, I mean, I can think of a few different sayings we'll get around to. But yeah, when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? So a lot has been made about the different Greek words here, both for love and for lambs or sheep, because they're different a couple of times. So the first 2 times Jesus says, do you love me? He's using the word agape, which we think of, for most of us, to think of this very, like the highest form of love. That's debatable, but typically how we think about it. And then the last one, he uses phileo, or brotherly love, kind of a passionate, caring love on a personal level, versus agape would be kind of this higher love, maybe not emotional, but like deeper in some ways. I don't know how to explain that.
Like unconditional love?
Like unconditional, but not like an emotional response to something. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so it could be read as Jesus saying, like, do you love me like agape? And then Peter responds with, you know I love you. And he says phileo each time. He says, like, you know I love you, like I passionately care about you. I love you. And then he says, do you love me? And he says, yes, you know I love you. Same way with a phileo. And then Jesus says, feed my lambs, tend my sheep. So he seems to be accepting those answers in some level. But then in the 3rd verse, he says, do you love me? Do you phileo love me? Which Peter has answered 2 times already. And he says, like, you asked me 3 times. He says, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. And Jesus says, and he says phileo again. Jesus says, feed my sheep. And so some other stories that come to mind for me are stories that more focus on Peter. Like when Jesus says, you're all going to run away. What does Peter say?
Not him. He's not going to.
They may all leave, but not me. I'll do anything. It's a little braggadocious. It's very much like, I got this, I will do it, I can make it happen. And in here, he doesn't say, I've proved myself. He says, you know. It is a passive thing of, Jesus, you know my heart. You can tell me, you know that I love you. It's just a very different position to be speaking from than his other times. Much more humble, and caring. And so it's interesting reading Father Brown. Obviously, he's Catholic, and reading this and trying to understand. I think it was in the last 200 years or so that the Catholic Church interpreted this as definite proof that Peter was the one who was set to lead the church, number one. Father Brown would tell you, like, that's a rare thing for the Catholic Church to do, to tell you how to interpret a specific verse of the Bible like that. And 2, that's probably not an accurate way of interpreting it. Not that Peter didn't have a special relationship in some way, but to use it dogmatically like that was incorrect. He says it more graciously than that because he has to get this thing printed by the Catholic Church, but he says that. And so we have Jesus, we have Peter responding to Jesus 3 times, kind of reinstating, as a lot of the Bibles will say, Peter as this leader of the apostles, and Jesus saying, "Tend my sheep." Now, this is another one where it comes down to languages, which is a little hard to explain. But each time Jesus says something a little different. But the 2 verbs he uses for tend or feed, I think that's how they're. So feed would be boskin, and tend would be poimanine. I butchered those, but the first one, Boskein, it means to feed, both literally and figuratively in the Old Testament when it's used for feeding animals. Whereas the other one, I'm going to spell it for you, Poimainin. That one has a broader meaning to guide or guard or feed, both figuratively and literally in the Old Testament as it's used. It's also used to mean to rule or govern, which is obviously how the Catholic Church would add into that. And so there's this concept of Jesus, this is the apostolic mission, this is the call. And that's where we get understanding how we understand the previous story, the way we read into it, these views of the apostolic mission with the net and the fish and the hauling, that Peter is called in and the disciples along with him to fulfill this mission of Jesus. Now, a long time ago, we were talking about what it means to love Jesus, especially, and to love God. This is what we were talking about in chapters 13, 14, 15. Does anyone remember kind of what Jesus tied this to? If you love me, you will
Feed my
Oh.
sheep.
feed my sheep. Another thing Jesus said, he said this a few times, so that was kind of a bad lead in because there's the 4 or 5 answers that are acceptable. But he said,
Follow me.
Tend my flock.
"In my flock, you'll obey my commandments.
Yes.
You'll basically do as I would do as I did." Jesus, when he teaches, he says, "Everything I'm doing is I learned from the Father. The Father told me to do it, and I did it." We think of that when we think of Philippians 2, that he humbled himself, following God's commandments, and that the disciples are supposed to do this. And so Jesus says, "Do you love me?" And then he says, "Feed my sheep, tend to them, take care of them the way I have. I'm giving that to you." What did Jesus say is the greatest form of love?
That you would die for your friends. That you
And
would give up your life for your friend.
And so how would you expect this small story of "Do you love me? Feed my sheep, live as I live" to end when it comes to Peter?
His death.
Not nicely.
And that is how this ends.
Peter, I understand that when he was also crucified, but he didn't feel worthy enough to be crucified like Jesus. Didn't he ask to be hung upside down?
Yes, so that is the tradition, absolutely, that Peter had kind of completely humbled himself at that point and asked to be hung upside down on the cross. We don't have proof of that, but that is has been the tradition for millennia. Uh,
Interesting to me how pre-Holy Spirit Peter versus post having the Holy Spirit, how much he changed, and just really just 180 degrees.
yeah, I mean, he still has some of this do first, think later. But with a more humble heart about it still at the same time. Uh, I mean, thinking about this story, if we in the Jesuit way try to put ourselves in the story and see it happening and unfolding in the scene, we have Jesus on the shore, and Peter sees him, hears it's Jesus, and just goes. And when he gets there, Jesus says, "Bring some of the food," or bring some of the fish, and so he turns around and will do whatever he's told. He immediately goes to help. It wasn't that he left because he's lazy, but he left because he's so focused and so on Jesus. And so it's kind of a beautiful depiction of, honestly, you can go through the fruits of the Spirit and you'll see them more in Peter here than you will earlier in the gospel for sure. And so how does Jesus end this story in 19? What's the last words he says?
Follow me.
Follow me. And so, as I said earlier, we see this similar story in Luke. And in Luke, it's a calling story of the disciples. And when he calls the disciples, especially in John or anywhere, I think, what are the words he says? If he's calling someone to be his disciple.
Is it take up your cross and follow me?
Depends on where, but he not necessarily the take up your cross part, but the other part. Every time he's going to say, "Follow me,"
Okay.
be a disciple. And so it's this follow me again, this kind of become a disciple again, or continue in that way. And then we have this interesting story at the end. Is there any other questions for that smaller section, 15 through 19? Cool. And then this last little story, when Peter talks, Peter goes, "Hey, what about that guy?" And then we have the story of, so Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them, and he was the first one who reclined next to Jesus. So this is also where we get the reason for the imagery of the Last Supper, for the famous imagery of it, comes from this text. When Peter saw him, he said to Jesus, "Lord, what about him?" Just a great way to read it. And Jesus said to him, "If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? Follow me." Again, so Jesus emphasizes again. And I think this is something Peter, at least here, especially takes back the position of all Christians that don't worry so much about how everyone else is going. Sometimes follow me. But if we're thinking about this in the context of the community that this is written to, we know that we view the beloved disciple as the writer of this. He's the witness. We see that in chapter 19, verse 35, and again here in verse 24. This is the disciple who testified to these things. And so the thought is, if this community who has had this disciple for a long time, if he is dying right now, and maybe this concept had been coming up that he won't die until Jesus comes back, is propagated through the community, this is a way of kind of addressing that question. Because nowhere else do we have kind of this same concept. It's right here. So this is obviously something that has spread in this community, because otherwise, why would you put it in as kind of a thought? And so this would be the response to it. If that's how it works, it doesn't matter. Follow Jesus. And if it's not, it doesn't matter. Follow Jesus. Also, in the concept of thinking that you're not to be concerned whether you die or suffer martyrdom while another lives until the return of Jesus. For one's calling is to follow Jesus, no matter where that following may lead them. And so it's just a call on the Christian life to, in spite of your circumstances or other circumstances, keeping Christ at the forefront of your mind and life. And so that's where 23 then would say that, pointing out like, oh, this is where that rumor came from, and even calls it a rumor that the disciple would not die. And yet Jesus didn't say to him that he wouldn't die, but if it was his will that he remained, what is it to you? So clearly he's dying. That's why you write that text, or has died. Because then we have 24, it says, this is the disciple who is testifying to you these things and has written them. And we know that his testimony is true. What's the problem with that verse? Verse 24.
Well, it sounds like he's the witness and the judge. You know, I'm the witness to this, and oh, by the way, my witness is true.
Yeah,
It's sort of circular.
yeah. But the weird use of we there. This is the disciple who is testifying to these things and has written them. And we know that his testimony is true. That's not how someone would write about themselves. Kind of reminds.
Is that the editorial we, or does he have people there helping him write all this mess down on whatever surfaces they have to write it on?
All those are possible things. And in John 19, he says this a little differently. And in 19 verse 35, he says, let me see. He who saw this has testified so that you may also believe. His testimony is true, and he knows that he tells the truth so that you also may continue to believe. And so that could be him writing in the third person or someone else writing for him. But this switch to the we, but then back to I in the second and 25 kind of has thrown people for a while of just how, like, who's writing what. But considering the verses before, where it seems to be saying that the beloved disciple is going to die, and just because Jesus hasn't come back yet doesn't mean that something's gone wrong. That was just a rumor that had spread. Most likely means that this verse at least has some kind of editorial nature to it. But yeah, I'm trying to think what else is about that. Oh, one of the interesting things is in the Gospels, the dependent on eyewitness testimony for the appearance of the risen Jesus is attested really early on in the New Testament writings. So our earliest writings are a lot of Paul's letters. So the Gospels, while not late typically, aren't as early as the epistles. And in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul testifies to the fact that Jesus saw the risen Peter. He says Peter was the first to see the risen Jesus. And then he goes on to say that he, one untimely born, also has seen him. But that concept seems to clearly be used in all the Gospels, that Peter is the first one to see him. Some people point out the issue of was Peter alone? Like, why is Peter emphasized? But it's not necessary that Peter's alone, because Paul also says that he saw him, and Paul wasn't alone when he had his sight. In any of the tellings of the story in Acts, which there's 3 of them, of the same story. So that's not important that Peter was alone, but that Peter is the first to see Jesus. It's not until kind of the books that we would date later that we worry about the eyewitness testimony for the ministry of Jesus, which feels natural. Because if you think about it, the earlier you are, all you need to attest to is the risen Jesus. Everybody knows Jesus lived and had a ministry because everyone remembers him. But the fact that he raised from the dead, not everyone saw that. And so you have to have eyewitness testimony. But the further away we are from it, the less and less there are the people who remember it for themselves. And so you have more eyewitness testimony to the claims of Jesus. That's like Luke, Acts, John, and 2 Peter are all kind of would date later than Matthew, Mark, and later than some of the other epistles. And so they all point to, I saw Jesus do this with my own eyes, which is what we see here in chapter 19 and in 21. So that's just an interesting thing to point out. Yeah. Trying to think what else. But we've come to the end here. One other thing, so when it came back to that love part, because that's kind of confusing, the agape and the brotherly. So some people say that it's important. One commentator says that, or one theologian says, commentators were divided about the respective value of the 2 verbs. Like, that's pretty common. But those who make them synonymous either ignore the semantics of agape or minimize the importance of the scene. That's interesting, though, that Father Brown will quote that, because Father Brown then goes on to say, I don't think it's that, I don't think there's that big of difference in the language. He has 3 points to his argument. One is that there seems to be a general interchangeability of the 2 verbs in John. The second is that in Hebrew and Aramaic, there's one word for love. So, like, when this actually happened, there couldn't have been the nuance that there is in the Greek, because Jesus would have been speaking Aramaic. So this is something that would have not had the same echo in the Semitic origin. And Peter answers yes to the question phrased with the verb agape, even though he expresses his love in terms of phileo, and thus shows no awareness that he is answering the question for a higher or more spiritual or more rational type of love, agape, with an offer of a lower or more affectionate form of love, phileo. So those are his arguments for why it's not important. I've heard, I've definitely heard sermons preached where it's like, Jesus says, do you love me? And Peter says, I love you like a brother. Do you love me? I love you like a brother. And then Jesus saying, do you even love me like that? And that hurting Peter's feelings for that reason. But I think you can go either way on that.
Well, I believe words are very important. And it's my understanding that the Eskimos have 32 words for snow, because the type of snow is very important to them. So is it wet snow, dry snow, small flakes, big flake, and on and on and on. And agape love and phileo love, to me, is substantially different.
Oh, they're definitely different in the Greek. There's definitely a difference on many levels in the Greek. Father Brown is making the argument that that's in the writing, but it couldn't have been in the actual, that might not have been able to be understood in some ways. But
Mm,
then why would the author take the time to choose different verbs? Would be the counter argument to that.
mm,
He's clearly like more than likely using them for a reason the way he is. Um, yeah, it's more of I'm just giving you an argument. I'm not probably lean towards them having like there being some level of difference, but Jesus accepting Peter's answer each time because he gives him a task. And so I don't think Jesus would give a task to someone whose answers he didn't find acceptable. So, and he gives them a task of leadership and carrying on the mission. And so like that, even though the verbs are different, the agape and phileo, that there's some level that they are united more than divided.
mm, mm. Interesting.
But that is and sorry, verse 25 is kind of another play on the end of chapter 20 where he says Jesus did so many more things. I could have written them all down, but these are written so that you may believe, which is ironic because then in 21 he's like, here are a couple more things Jesus did that I didn't write down earlier. You can believe. But he kind of wraps it up again, and Father Brown kind of gives him a nod and says, as someone who's added to the list of things that could be written down about this book of John, and feeling like there's so many more things I could have said, like, I'm not going to sit here and dissect this last phrase more than saying, I get it. So, and that's a phrase that also is used elsewhere at a time, or even in some of our songs that take from elsewhere, like what is it? The love of God is so great that, you know, if every stalk on earth was a quill, and every man a scribe by trade, and the ocean was full of ink, and the sky a parchment made, though we could write forever, we could fill up the sky with all of the goodness and speaking of God's love, and there would still be more to write. So that concept of just overwhelmingness of the goodness of God and the works of Jesus are combined are acceptable or good. As Jared said on Sunday, I approve. I approve the Bible verse. But if anyone have any questions, any of John, if you remember all of it, that's great. It's been 6 months of going through John. And as some of you said, it didn't like how could we possibly spend this much time? But at the same time, we could have spent so much more because there is really so much.
And Brooks, this First John letters was written by this John. Is that right?
Consider all the First Johns, the Gospel of John, and Revelation to be of
Revelations, all same John.
all the same John.
Well-
And yeah, you see a lot in First John, and even Father Brown, like people will use First John a lot to understand if they have any questions about some of the language.
Mm,
I'd have a comment. I'm so grateful to you and Mary Elizabeth for all the work that you have done to bring this to us.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, thank you.
We really appreciate it. I think we all feel that way, but you've taken us into detail, both of you, into detail that some things were just brand new to me. I'd never heard that before. So that was really helpful, and I certainly do appreciate it. Thank you so much.
I'm glad. I really enjoyed going on some of these deep dives. I've heard Mary Elizabeth say before, like, if I wasn't having to teach this, I probably wouldn't have done it. I felt that when I was reading some of these big words, and I was like, yeah, I probably would take more of a break right now if I didn't have to teach this. I'm grateful to have taught it so that I could have that motivation.
Well, thank
Well,
you, thank you.
amen to that, and thank you for the opportunity, Brooke. You and Mary Elizabeth too have just let the word speak out to us and in our hearts. And I appreciate your humor. Sometimes you get so heavy in the scriptures. It's good to realize they're such poignant words for now, you know. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Ross.
Very grateful.
Definitely, thank you.